Welcome back to Face the Nation. We're joined now by Jay Sekulow. He's a member of the president's legal team and chief counsel at the American Center for Law and Justice. Mr. Sekulow, I want to start this morning with the president's tweet in which he wrote,
Sure.
"I'm being investigated for firing the FBI director by the man who told me to fire the FBI director. Witch hunt." What's he talking about?
The president issued that tweet on social media because of the report in the Washington Post from 5 anonymous sources, none of which, of course, anyone knows about, alleging that the president was under investigation in this purported expanded probe. The fact of the matter is the president has not been and is not under investigation. So this was his response via Twitter, via social media, was in response to the Washington Post piece with 5 anonymous sources. And by the way, John, 5 anonymous sources, they don't even identify the agencies upon which these individuals purportedly work. So the response there is clear. And I want to be very clear about this. The president is not and has not been under investigation.
How do you know?
Because we've received no notice of investigation. There's been no notification from the special counsel's office that the president is under investigation. In fact, to the contrary. What we know is what James Comey said, the last thing we know when he testified just a couple weeks back, that the president was not and is not a target of an investigation.
Of course, there have been events since James Comey told him that. Is it your view, and just to educate viewers, that if you were under investigation, there would be an obligation for the special counsel to let you know? Couldn't you be under investigation and they're just not letting you know yet?
Well, look, I can't imagine a scenario where the president would not be aware of it. Number one, there's a serious constitutional issue here. I mean, I want you to think about the context upon which this would take place under the Washington Post's theory of the case. This is the Washington Post theory, that the president of the United States, after being advised by his attorney general and the office of the deputy attorney general, determined to remove James Comey from the FBI directorship. If the Washington Post leaks were correct, the president of the United States would be, if this was correct, under investigation for taking the action that the Department of Justice asked him to take. That raises not only it's not a serious constitutional question, it's an easy constitutional question. That's impossible. The president cannot be investigated, or certainly cannot be found liable for engaging in an activity that he clearly has powers to do under the Constitution.
Powers to fire the FBI director. And let me ask you this question more.
James Comey acknowledged that, by the way, John. I mean, James Comey said he served at the pleasure of the president.
More broadly, the big question really is, did the president interfere in any way in the investigation that James Comey was undertaking?
No, in fact, he said to the contrary. You remember in part of the interviews that he's given, he acknowledged that when he removed James Comey, especially during the Lester Holt interview, when you read the entire context, the transcript of that interview, he acknowledged that by firing James Comey as FBI director, the president acknowledged that he would, in fact, probably extend the nature and length of the scope of the FBI, the special counsel probe. But he thought it would be the best for the American people. And look, I've got the letter.
Let me ask you.
And the 2 letters from both the... It's important here. The FBI director was removed after a deliberative process, and in part based on, of course, the statements coming from his own attorney general and deputy attorney general, who said, and I want to read this, as a result, the FBI is unlikely to regain public and congressional trust until it has a director who understands the gravity of the mistakes and pledges to never repeat them. Having refused to admit his errors, the director cannot be expected to implement the necessary corrective changes. So this is not coming out of whole cloth. This is coming out of recommendations. Yes, sir.
The president said he would speak under oath about all of this. That, I assume, is still true?
Yeah, the president was very clear about that. He said that if he was asked to do it, he would. That's been asked and addressed. Again,
would he
I want to be clear here.
With Congress? Would he? Because you got this investigation going on. It takes a long time. He could kind of short circuit by just going up to Congress. Senator Graham and others have called him to testify in front of Congress. Could that get at this faster?
Well, that doesn't short-circuit anything. There's multiple tracks of investigations going on here, which is problematic, because once the special counsel was appointed, it changes the nature of who can and who will not participate before Congress. So I haven't discussed that with the president at all. He stated he would testify under oath. He didn't specify the venue. We'll just leave that as it is. Again, there are multiple tracks of investigation. But again, I want to be clear here. The president is not under investigation. James Comey said it. Nothing has changed since then.
The president said last week he would release the tapes of, if there were tapes, of his conversation this week. That hasn't happened. Where is that?
I think the president is going to address that in the week ahead. There was a lot of issues this past week. The president gave a major address in Cuba. We had the assassination attempt of Steve Scalise. There were a lot of intervening factors. So the issue of the tapes, I think right now was not priority issue number one when the country was facing an assassination attempt on Steve Scalise and other members of Congress and their staffs, by the way. And our thoughts and prayers still with them. I know he's still in a very difficult situation. But also, he gave a major address on the situation in Cuba and the attempt there to reconcile and redraft a policy that makes sense. So the president has a lot of issues, and I think this shows that the president is concentrating on governing. This issue will be addressed in due course, I suspect, next week.
All right, Jay Sekulow, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
And we're back now with our political panel, Phil. The president said he was being investigated, but his lawyer now suggests he was just basically retweeting maybe something in the Post. Where are we on this?
Well, I can tell you the Washington Post, my colleagues there have reported, based on U.S. officials, that the president is indeed under investigation, that it is an investigation into his potential obstruction of justice, in addition to a number of other issues related to the Russia matter. Now, the president may not have been given any sort of formal notice about that, but that doesn't mean that Mueller, the special counsel, is not investigating him.
Ramesh, Jay Sekulow's argument seemed to be that because the president has the power under, I guess, the unitary executive to fire his FBI director, that's it. He has the power, and that sort of opens and shut the case, but it doesn't seem like it will.
Well, I think there are a number of potential problems with that line of argument. One is that if you're doing something corruptly, that raises a separate set of legal issues. And two is that there's a question of political accountability. It is certainly true that it's within the constitutional power of the president to pardon anybody who commits a crime in his name, for example, but that doesn't mean that the House and Senate would or should treat that as just par for the course. Nixon's, the articles of impeachment against him, Clinton, the articles of impeachment against him, both referred to obstruction of justice. So the idea that there's no accountability for that is, I think, just not true to our constitutional tradition.
Jamel, the first kind of question that the president's lawyer had to clear up was one about something the president tweeted. Although they say, and the president says, this is a great thing for me, but if he had not tweeted about this investigation, we wouldn't have had to spend the time talking about it. Is he basically building this case for himself by what he says?
I think that's a fair thing to say. If you look at sort of this entire saga, so much of it is self-inflicted. So much of it stems from choices the president made, impulsive firings, for example, tweets, going on, having interviews in national outlets, and simply saying outright that he's, I fired Director Comey because of this Russia stuff. Had the president simply shown more discretion, he would not be in this mess. And we're sort of in this sort of feedback loop where the president's lack of discretion results in investigations or pushback, which then fuels further lack of discretion, which then fuels, further investigations and pushback.
And that's why so many congressional Republicans wish that he would just stop tweeting, because they worry that if he wasn't in trouble with the special counsel before, he is now, because of the things that he's saying publicly. And they also worry that he's essentially taunting these investigators. If you're saying to these investigators, you're fake news, you're a witch hunt, they worry that's just going to embolden them. You really don't want to be on the wrong side of the FBI and the special counsel.
But it's not just what he tweets. He said on the record in an interview that he fired Comey because he was upset about the Russia investigation. That's the kind of thing that Jay Sekulow is trying to barrel past in his interview with you. And, if the president lacks impulse control, a sense of self-discipline, that's not a problem about the medium of Twitter.
Phil, is there any solution to this challenge that they kind of have to keep dealing with here, which is the president is, in a sense, taking himself off message?
The solution would be for him to focus on his agenda and lay off Twitter, but we've shown it, or he's shown that that's not really possible. Look, he's in the White House stewing over this. He's angry. He's confiding in friends about his frustration with the Russia matter, the cloud, as he's referred to it over and over again. And I don't know where this ends. We currently have the White House staffing up with lawyers. Vice President Pence just hired his own counsel. The president, Trump's lawyer in New York, Michael Cohen, has hired his own lawyer. So they're clearly preparing for a much more serious investigation.
And that starts to get quite expensive for those who have to pay all of those legal bills, which creates tension in a White House, in addition to everything else we've been talking about. Nancy, Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, testified this week. A lot of Democratic senators were frustrated they weren't getting answers from him. Where does that stand? Are they going to get those answers they wanted, specifically in this case about the firing of James Comey?
Probably not, because they really have no recourse in Congress to somehow compel him to answer questions about his conversations with the president. And you really saw a split this week between Democrats who thought, you know, there really is no written policy that prevents him from sharing what he said to the president, what the president said to him about James Comey or anything else, and Republicans who said, no, there really is a tradition. The president's top advisors do need to be able to keep those conversations confidential because the president has a right to free information and guidance from the people around him. He can't be thinking that anything he says to them is going to end up in Congress or in the public space.
Jamel, I thought that actually Attorney General Sessions, because he was able to say, I'm not going to talk about the obstruction things, and was able to defend himself on the collusion, actually ended up helping the White House this week.
Right. I think Attorney General Sessions' sort of emphatic denials of collusion ended up, taking some of the heat away from President Trump, suggesting that the kind of almost conspiracy that's been sketched with regards to collusion is overstated, and if the president could show more discretion, would have, I think, really helped the president politically this past week going forward. But the problem, of course, is that Sessions could give those kind of politically helpful performances again and again and again. But as long as the president is unwilling to temper what he says in whatever forum, it kind of is a wash in the end.
In this whole context, the White House the president had a cabinet meeting this week. I want to take a look at a little bit of it, and then, Ramesh, I want to get your thoughts about what we think this was intended to do. Let's take a look.
President, what an incredible honor it is to lead the Department of Health and Human Services at this pivotal time under your leadership. I can't thank you enough for the privilege that you've given me and the leadership that you've shown.
Mr. President, last week was a great week. It was Infrastructure Week. Thank you so much for coming over to the Department of Transportation. Hundreds and hundreds of people were just so thrilled, hanging out, watching the whole ceremony.
On behalf of the entire senior staff around you, Mr. President, we thank you for the opportunity and the blessing that you've given us to serve your agenda and the American people, and we're continuing to work very hard every day to accomplish those goals.
Ramesh, cabinet meetings like this tend to be showy at the start. We're familiar with that, but this still was a little bit different.
Well, it was the first time he's got his entire cabinet assembled for a meeting, and he, I guess, wanted to put on a show. Among some of the cabinet members, not all, it seemed to devolve into a contest about who could praise the president most fulsomely, and I'd say that the chief of staff, Reince Priebus, won that contest, going away. But a lot of the others, they were just saying thank you for the honor to be able to serve the public, which is, I think, a pretty anodyne kind of statement that people in both parties would have said.
Right.
Look, these are smart people. They know what works with this president. It's like the Saudis putting a 10-story high image of him up on a building. They know what he reacts to. They're all competing to get his attention, to get him to embrace their proposals for how to move their particular department forward. And they know that one of the quickest ways to do that is to flatter him.
Phil, there was an orchestrated feel to it. Again, as Ramesh quite rightly puts it, this is not totally unfamiliar. The cabinet members praising the boss, but it's still, they all seem to have been given a memo. And what I wonder is whether this tells us anything about the sense of where this president feels in either under siege. He's talked about being under siege, whether he feels it personally, whether this was an effort to kind of beat back or put forward some kind of strategy, or whether it was just about saying nice things about the president.
Well, clearly the president feels like his whole presidency is under siege and under attack. But these cabinet members, when they introduce him at events in public individually, they say the same thing. Vice President Pence says it everywhere he goes, broad-shouldered leader, the amazing sort of President Donald J. Trump. And it's sort of like the dear leader language you hear out of North Korea or another country. We're not used to that in the United States, but President Trump responds to that. He feels like this is very much a personal sort of leadership style that he has, and he wants to be praised, and it works.
Jamel, let's switch quickly to health care. The Senate is trying to put together a bill. The president apparently told some senators that he thought the House bill that had come out had been was mean. Where do you see things right now for this?
I mean, part of the trouble here is that we don't really know what is in the Senate bill. It's being crafted in almost complete secrecy. Key senators are unwilling to speak about its contents. Vox.com did a series of interviews with 8 senators who, to a person, could not describe how the bill they are considering meets their goals. And so it's substantively, it's generally difficult to say whether or not the Senate bill is going to be less mean than the House bill. I think it is clear that Majority Leader McConnell is desperate to get something across the finish line, is trying to insulate his members from any kind of political or public pressure. And I think Trump's scandals have had this effect of making that even more urgent, that the longer the president is sort of under scrutiny, the longer our political conversation is focused on the president's misconduct, perhaps, the more difficult it is for them to do anything.
Nancy, Mitch McConnell's a smart guy. He knows how to do things. What's his strategy here?
Well, you know, his challenge is if you're not going to do the House bill because it's mean, and if you're not going to do Obamacare because you think that's a failure, your universe of options is quite small. So they're trying to thread this needle in private. They're trying to craft something that is somehow going to get 50 members of their caucus, you know, the most conservative, the most moderate, and that's incredibly difficult. It's pretty clear at this point they're not going to meet their self-imposed deadline at the beginning of July just because time is running out. They don't have information from the CBO about what this would cost and what it would mean, and they've promised to do that before they try to pass something.
30 seconds.
I had a long conversation with a member of the Senate Republican Working Group on Friday. I get the impression there are very serious decisions that are still not made. How many people are going to be eligible for Medicaid? What's the growth rate going to be? I agree. I don't think that they are close to hitting this deadline.
And the question also is, in the way they're doing it, don't they run up against the criticism they had about the Affordable Care Act, which actually did have lots of bipartisan discussions?
Absolutely, and I think Senator Rubio is going to probably be joined by other Republicans in saying, whatever the process by which you're drafting this, you've got to have an extended conversation. You can't just ram this through once it's put together.
Okay, well, that's the end of our extended conversation. Thanks to all of you. We'll be right back in a moment. We turn now to CBS This Morning co-host Norah O'Donnell, who joins us from Seoul, where she will be interviewing the president of South Korea, President Moon Jae-in. Norah?
Hi, John, and greetings. Yes, from here in Seoul, South Korea. It is a new day here in this country, in part because there's a new president who is promising a change in strategy. President Moon was elected just last month, and what he's talking about is going back to the Sunshine Policy, opening a dialogue with the North. And that is a significant change, a significant break from the past decade. In fact, President Moon just this week said he wants to sit knee to knee with the North Korean dictator, President Kim Jong-un.
And Norah, your interview comes at an important time as well for his relations with the United States.
And the timing is incredibly significant because President Moon is heading to Washington and the White House to meet with President Trump. And that relationship between the South Korean president and the U.S. president is incredibly important. This is one of the most important strategic alliances in Asia and part of the world. We've heard the Defense Secretary Mattis saying that North Korea's nuclear weapon program is the most urgent threat to U.S. national security. How will President Trump and President Moon work together? We've already seen the new president create some distance with the United States. One of his advisors saying just today that they're talking about their own anti-missile program. What about the status of the 28,000 U.S. troops who are stationed here? There's talk about, in a concession perhaps to the Chinese or to the North, to talk about reducing the number of joint military exercises. So all of those things are on the table as this president in particular is looking at a way to find a solution to North Korea's nuclear program.
An incredibly delicate time, and we're happy to have you over there, Norah. It's a bit of a homecoming for you a little bit.
My dad served in the U.S. Army for 30 years, so I was stationed here. My dad was stationed at the Yongsan Army Garrison, so I actually lived on the military base for 2 years when I was about 10 years old. So it's been a while. It's been 30 years since I've been here. So it's really exciting for me to be back here. I'm going to take a tour of the garrison tomorrow, see if my old home is still there. But also it's just significant because they're talking about moving most of our troops from Yongsan to another base further away from the DMZ. So I have a lot to learn. And also because I think this is just a new time, as I said earlier, with this new president, President Moon, going to the White House. What is this going to mean for the future of the Korean Peninsula?
Nora O'Donnell on assignment. Nora, thanks so much. Again, Nora's interview will air on CBS This Morning Tuesday at 7 a.m. Eastern and Pacific, and also throughout the day on our digital network, CBSN. We'll be back in a moment. Commencement season is just about wrapped up, and as we take a look at some of our favorite speeches this year, instead of focusing on the famous, we thought we'd share the fresh wisdom of the graduates themselves. They spoke the languages of the world.
Friends and fellow graduates, welcome. In Arabic, ahlan wa sahlan, or in the words of Confucius, 有朋自远方来，不亦乐乎.
And they did it with a millennial touch.
But first, let me take a selfie.
They braved the elements.
Thank you, everyone, for hanging out in the rain.
We usually try to forget,
without missing a beat.
Hidden in our stories are silences that critically shape our experiences.
They showed us they were listening when we thought they were just wasting their time.
SpongeBob taught us, love yourself and stay optimistic. Even South Park. South Park taught me to question authority, question power, dig beneath the most convenient answer.
And in their enthusiasm for the lessons of life, they showed us they were actually paying attention to the important stuff too.
Remember that difficult roads often lead to beautiful destinations. Don't worry about your failures. Worry about the chances you miss when you don't even try. Worry about the direction you fall in. Fall forward, never backwards.
Cherish within your heart the love of those characteristics which will make you the best parent, partner, coworker, and friend. Don't silence those who have been silenced their whole lives. Often it's the quiet person in the corner who has the best stuff to say. And lastly, for the love of God, shut up and listen.
Let courage be our defense against cowardice, hope our defense against despair, compassion our defense against destruction.
The class of 2017, from Spelman College in Atlanta to Keene University in New Jersey, and Boise State University to West Point.
Yes.
Graduates, we salute you. And we'll be right back. That's it for us today. To all the fathers out there, happy Father's Day. Thanks for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm John Dickerson.